California, and work for is doing and how it's structured. But let me now get to the topic that I was asked to speak about, and that is the future of senior programs in California. And I want to do that by presenting you two quotes that will give us some context for asking that question. Let me start with the first quote. "I want to shrink government down to the size where I can flop it into the bathtub and choke it to death." I'm going to repeat that. "I want to shrink government down to the size where I can flop it into the bathtub and choke it to death." That first quote is from a guy named Grover Norquist, who runs a anti-tax group in Washington, D.C. Now let me give you a second quote. "We can never insure 100% of the population against 100% of the hazards and vicissitudes of life. But we have tried to frame a law which will give some measure of protection to the average citizen and to his family against the loss of a job and poverty-ridden old age. This law, too, represents a cornerstone in a structure which is being built, but is by no means complete." Of course, the second quote is from President Franklin Roosevelt on the day he signed Social Security into law 75 years ago this year. And the reason for bringing you these two dramatically different points of view as we begin our discussion this morning is so that we can have a common understanding of the challenges and the framework we are in.
God bless you.
And what we face as we ask ourselves about the future of senior programs, safety net programs in California. My point is that these two ideas, the first one being a concept that says that government is bad, that government needs to be eviscerated and ultimately choked out of its effectiveness, versus a point of view that says that the concept and reality of Social Security, and I'm not just talking about the program, but I'm talking about the words Social Security, social safety net, is a cornerstone which needs to be built upon. And as the quote continues, but is no means complete. 75 years later, it continues to be our mission to complete what Roosevelt said. And it continues to be our mission to first of all, analyze and learn and know what the forces are behind the Grover Norquist quote. Because that dichotomy, if I may say the word, that dialectic is what this current fight is about right now. These two contrasting philosophical points of view are at the heart of the current national and California moment. They are rooted in the fundamental and conflicting views of who we are as Americans. The competition around these two ideas is the framework for what we must struggle to both preserve and win in Washington, in Sacramento, and on Main Street. So if you think about this frame, that we are really about, in a discussion and in a struggle that not only is about the specific programs that we hold dear and we care about, but the very framework and the very meaning of who we are as a nation and who we are as a state, it gives us a deeper understanding of the struggle that we're in. And as you know, it ain't a pretty picture. We are in a period of deep fiscal challenge. 11 states across the country have gaps of more than 10% in their budgets. California at 9%, Minnesota at 26%, Arizona at 35%, Florida at 32%, Illinois at 36%, and Nevada, the granddaddy of them all, at 56%. Further, public discontent with government has grown and grown and grown. There's a wonderful little book which I would recommend to you called Why Government Works, Why America Needs the Feds, by an author named Milton Essman. In the very first few pages of that book, he cites the fact that in the 1960s, Americans trusted their government at about the rate of 80%. That number is less than 20%. And of course, we all know what is happening in California and what has been taking place in the last few years. So given these issues and giving this bigger picture perspective, what is it we can do and what is our mission? And how can we reclaim this historic moment and bring back nothing less than sanity, if you will, to our public discussion? First, I think we could lay claim to some important victories. The accomplishment of winning healthcare reform is huge. Just to cite a few of its features, first of all, it expands Medicaid in the next few years, up to 133% of poverty. In California, that probably means another 2 million people will have coverage. It absolutely, despite what the commercial said, the health care bill literally saved Medicare. And I'll tell you why. In 2017, Medicare was about to go insolvent. What this legislation did was it slowed the growth of Medicare from 8% a year to 6% a year. It did not stop the growth, it slowed the growth. And by doing that, it extended the solvency life of Medicare by anywhere from 9 to 11 years. The bill closed eventually, by 2020, the donut hole. And of course, one of the most important parts and least reported parts of this is the incredible importance of our first national long-term care insurance program called CLASS, the CLASS program, which I know you talked about. So together, the work that we've done, having met, being reminded by Janet that I met her first during the Clinton years in fighting for health care, and all the efforts, beginning with actually FDR, and then Harry Truman, and LBJ, and all the others, both Democratic and Republican presidents in the past, and Democratic and Republican majorities in the past, who actually have sought health care. What we did this year is really, really important, and I think that we should be proud of that accomplishment. You want to applaud? Go right ahead. Do you want me to take? Do I take? Yeah.
Get comfortable.
It's an inside joke, folks.
Get comfortable.
You want me to do the sleeve? Do I do the sleeves too? No, I'm not going to do the sleeves. Having said all the above, we know that as an organization as big as ARP, we have to do a better job. We have to create and cement strong, working, strategic, and tactical partnerships statewide to fight the daily fight, as well as create systematic change that brings the needed funding for safety net programs. And we have to strengthen and build our relationship with you. That is key, because fundamentally the interest of this community, of the IHSS community, for both providers and beneficiaries, is the same as the interest of every Californian over the age of 50. So let me suggest, as part of my presentation today, some concrete ways that we can join forces in the next 2 years that increases our effectiveness and makes us, and so that we can make a difference in the coming years. Let me talk to you now. Janet introduced me as a bigwig. Let me talk to you, I hate that term, but let me talk to you now as a grassroots organizer, which is really where I come from. First of all, do not take lightly the current threats to Social Security. They are real. It is not only the offensive statements of Alan Simpson, and I won't quote them because they're too offensive. It is not only the negative attitude that this so-called commission, the Deficit Commission, starts with. It is the fact that we are in a moment where there are a lot of public doubts about the future of Social Security. And I want to say that from ARP's perspective, that we are committed to fighting both cuts to the program and raising the age for eligibility, okay, as a way to pay for this deficit. This deficit comes from a bad economy and from poorly chosen tax cuts. It is not and cannot be on the backs of our safety net programs and cannot be on the back of Social Security. Here's the interesting part about Social Security. And when you're thinking about not just how you talk to Democratic legislators, but also how you talk to Republican legislators as we go into this next phase, this post-election phase, to fight against any proposals coming from this commission for cuts to Social Security. Here's the interesting thing about Social Security. It is solvent all the way to 2043. And in 2043, it can pay 2041, excuse me. I had an actuarial goof up there. 2040, never goof up your actuarials, folks. All the way to 2041, it is solvent. It can pay full benefits. And even at that point, it can still pay 73% of its committed benefits. I'll second that. Now, you want to know why? And you want to know who we can give credit to for that? Ronald Reagan and Alan Greenspan. You know why we can give credit to them for that? Because in the early 80s, Social Security really was going broke. And what happened after President Reagan had failed first to change Social Security and reform it and privatize it, it was very clear that Social Security was about 18 months away from insolvency, so he put together this commission that included Alan Greenspan, Speaker O'Neill, Claude Pepper, who's a great hero on senior programs, Bob Dole, Robert Michael, who was a minority leader on the House side back then. This is again the early 80s. And they created the reforms that give us the present solvency that we have and the long-term solvency that we have. And here's the point that I'm making about this. When you talk to Republicans, when you talk to anybody out there, but particularly Republicans, you need to make the point that, number one, there is no crisis in Social Security. Number two, it does not, in fact, it helps mitigate against the deficit. And number three, it is a bipartisan consensus with the very reforms that saved it all the way to 2041 being done by Republicans and Democrats together. At the end of that process, Bob Dole said in public, "This is my finest Senate moment," when they saved Social Security from insolvency. So it is not broken. It ain't perfect. We need to fix what needs fixing. But it goes all the way to 2041. And I'll tell you this, it goes to 2041 with a 1% growth rate in the economy. And a 1% growth rate in the economy, we've had a negative growth rate for the last few years because of the recession, particularly when economies were in moderately good shape, they're at 2 to 3 to 4%. So we can just get it back to where it ought to be, 2 or 3 or 4%, it will move out that 2041 year to longer, even with the baby boom explosion. Reforms to Social Security happened under Republican administrations. They added benefits for persons with disabilities under Dwight Eisenhower. They added the COLA under Richard Nixon. So my point is, we need to join together because we cannot let one single cent be cut from Social Security as a result of this deficit commission. And that's our next fight, and it's a big one. Our next strategic point is that we have to do a much better job of getting middle-class older Californians engaged in this fight. We've got to be in the suburbs of Riverside County, of Placer County. Is that for me? Oh, okay. We've got to be in the suburbs talking to people about long-term care and home and community-based care. Because guess what? One of the worst myths out there is that people believe that when they get to Medicare age, it pays for long-term care. It pays for nursing homes. People believe that.